Good afternoon and welcome to our live Q&A about sea trout fishing in Argentina. My name is Olly Thompson and I am a travel specialist and I focus on our South American products. I'm very fortunate to have traveled to Argentina extensively. I take groups to the Rio Grande every year. And it's a river that some years ago now, but a river that I once guided on at one of the original lodges, which is called Pen. Why should you go sea trout fishing in Argentina? To be honest, we have some great trout fishing in the UK and in Europe, but in terms of the size of the sea trout and also the numbers of fish, really nowhere comes even remotely close to Argentina. Today I'm going to be my primary focus is going to be on two rivers, the Rio Gallegos and the Rio Grande. These are the two primary sea trout fisheries in Argentina, and they are, to be honest, the two best sea trout fisheries in the world. While at home we think a 10-pound fish is a fish of a lifetime almost, and it is, in that part of the world, 10 pounds is considered average. And each week it's catching fish of 15 and 16 pounds and up is a great fish, but that's something that a lot of people do. And the trophy mark can be 20 pounds and up, which anywhere in the world is a truly enormous fish. So as I've said, I travel to the Rio Grande every year. And I'm going to start with the Rio Grande before the Rio Gallegos. The two rivers do vary in nature quite a lot. So the Rio Grande is the deeper of the two rivers. It's all the way down south in Tierra del Fuego. The season on the river, really, the main part of the season starts in May and it runs through to the end of March. And during that, I mean, a huge amount of sea trout will run the river. It's much like a salmon river in that early season you get those incredibly strong, bright fish running through. And once we start getting towards the latter part of February, those fish start to color up and they spread throughout the system. Now, the main part of the Rio Grande, the fishing stretch, is about 70 kilometers long, just a little over. The pools are quite deep and the river's quite swift. This contrasts quite a lot with the Rio Gallegos, which is located further north. And the Rio Gallegos, it's a much shallower river, and the ground that you can fish is a lot longer. So the sea trout will run over a couple of 100 kilometers on the Rio Gallegos. The nature of the river being much shallower does mean that the fish tend to run upstream at a greater speed. And the nice thing is you also don't need to fish as deep as you sometimes do on the Rio Grande. It's a trip that I take a group there to Argentina every January, and it's become somewhere that has been completely irreplaceable in my fishing calendar for the year. And I think for a lot of rods, they really do return to Argentina year after year, because it is just a very special trip. It's not easy to get there, but you do know once you're there, you can really target sea trout of a lifetime. Now on the Rio Grande, there's an abundance of fantastic lodges. There's now over 7 lodges on the river, and much like salmon fishing, with the early run tends to come in November. So focusing on the lower part of the river is generally certainly considered best. Although the early run in November really is a mixture of sea trout and salmon, but the main part of the season, as I've said, really doesn't start until January. And you'll find that the lower lodges like Villa Maria and La Vija that have access to those bottom beats, they get the first dibs at those really bright, fresh fish. Once we start moving into January, the latter part of January, La Vija, Santa Maria Bahete, Cautepen, which is on the middle reaches of a river, those lodges start to come into their own a little more because the fish are better spread throughout the system. Really from February onwards, there's a really good spread of fish throughout the system. And you can find that actually some of the lower water is less productive than it was earlier in the season, just because those fish have already passed through. And that's where areas like San Jose and Cautepen offer fantastic fishing and fantastic single-handed fishing also. The water is more intimate than it is further downstream, and it means that you can target fish using single-handed rods often, and also targeting fish on switch rods, but the need for big 13-foot sticks like you might be using early in the season is not really necessary. On the Rio Gallegos, the sea trout do run the system quite a lot quicker, and I was there a couple of years ago fishing one of the upstream lodges called El Rincon, and second week in January I wasn't sure how many fish were going to be several hundred kilometers upstream, but we caught fresh fish, which I was amazed with, and that had meant those fish had traveled upstream a couple of hundred kilometers within the space of a week, so they really had been moving very quickly. The other thing that's interesting about the Rio Gallegos in comparison with the Rio Grande is you do also have some wonderful trout fishing. 2 of the lodges we offer, Besha Sofia and El Rincon, they're not great sea trout fisheries only. They also have fantastic brown trout fishing. And that's because on the upper river, you have rivers like El Rincon has the Rio Penitente, that is an important spawning tributary that flows into the Gallegos. And Bella Vista has the Rio Chico, that's another important spawning tributary, and one that offers some truly unbelievable trout fishing. When you're fishing both of these rivers, Rio Grande and Rio Gallegos, having the right tackle is, of course, very important, and it's a long way to travel, so having the right kit is essential. Now, if I'm fishing for Rio Grande early season like I do in January, I tend to set up 2 rods, one with a Scandi line and then one with a Skagit line. This is because with sea trout, getting the right depth can be essential. You tend to find most of the guides on all of the lodges will prefer to fish the top layer first, using the most delicate, least aggressive tactic, which will be something like a small rubber-legged nymph on an intermediate tip, a Scandi line and a long leader. If that doesn't work, then they'll start to go through the layers, and sometimes you might end up fishing on the Skagit line, 12 foot of T18 when you're really dredging, and that can be the difference between catching fish or not. Those two-handed rods, for me, it's all down to personal preference, but early season on the Rio Grande, I like a 13-foot 6 with a Skagit line, and possibly a 12-foot 6 or a 13-foot 6 with a Scandi line. The 12-foot 6 being 7-8 weight, and the 13-6 being 7-8 or 8-9. Once you move late into the season or you're fishing further upstream, that's when a small two-handed rod with a Skagit, like a 12-foot 6, that 12-foot 6, 7 weight, and a switch rod can be really useful. Again, with one with a Scandi and one with a Skagit. The exception is if you're fishing one of the main tributaries, somewhere like Cautopen called the Rio Menendez, then a single-handed rod has an advantage because it's very intimate, interesting fishing. And it's just a little bit too big for a two-handed rod. On the Rio Gallegos, it's much the same, although I tend to, especially if you're fishing Becha Vista or El Rincon, on the main river, I tend to never fish longer than about a 12-foot 6, 7-8 weight rod. And when I was there in January, I was actually fishing my switch rod, which proved to be the most useful. Both the Rio Penitente at El Rincon and the Rio Chico at Becha Sevilla are single-handed fisheries. For the sea trout there, a 10-foot 7 weight is ideal. And for the trout, a 9-foot 5 or a 9-foot 6 weight is super. I tend not to fish too light because although you're fishing for trout, you might be targeting trout on the tributaries. They also, it's quite common that you hook into sea trout. So fishing a 4 weight, not really ideal, I don't think. It is undeniable that traveling to Argentina does take quite a long time. But it's all, as many of these trips are, they are all part of the adventures, longer flights and a wee bit of travel. Coming from the UK is not too tough though, because you've got BA flights direct from London Heathrow to Buenos Aires. It does stop down for a couple of hours in Rio de Janeiro, but you don't actually get off the plane. The alternative is you can always go via Schiphol, Madrid, Frankfurt. There's lots of options. And on the other side, I'd really advise, if you're going there, spend a night in Buenos Aires. I'm not a city person, I would be the first to admit it. But of all of the cities I've been to, Buenos Aires really is very special. And there's few places in the world where you can have such an amazing steak and great wine at that kind of price, to be frank. There's lots of good areas to stay. A lot of time we focus on Recoleta and Palermo, which are two of the smart areas of the city. They're very comfortable, got an abundance of stunning places to eat and hotels. And then it's a quick hop to the domestic airport, which takes about 20 minutes. And there's only currently one operator for the internal flights, and that's Aerolíneas Argentinas. And for the Rio Grande, every year we hope that there will be a good schedule from Aeroparque, the domestic airport in Buenos Aires, to Rio Grande Airport, but often that's not the case. And it does mean a late night flight or an early morning flight. And for this reason, for recent years, we've been flying into Ushuaia, which does mean a longer transfer on the other side. But you've got stunning countryside to view as you drive over Tierra del Fuego to arrive at the lodge. Rio Gallegos is a little bit more simple because you do have direct flights into Rio Gallegos airport. And then usually the transfer time to the lodge is really not too bad. All of the lodges you'll find on both rivers extremely comfortable. The food is fantastic. The accommodation is great. They all come at different price points, and there's no bad option. It depends what you want to do. And I mean, if you want a more reasonably priced option, heading to El Rincon on the upper Rio Gallegos is an amazing trip for a mixture of brown trout and sea trout, as is Besha Sofia, as is fishing the upper Rio Grande at somewhere like San Jose Lodge. All of these are smaller lodges taking only 6 rods. If you choose to head a wee bit further downstream on the Rio Grande, you will see a higher concentration of sea trout throughout the season. This is, of course, reflected in the price. But somewhere like Estancia Maria Bajese and La Villa, they're still really good value for what they offer. And they're fantastic lodges that control or have access to over 35 kilometers of fishing on the river. And that means they're so good at adapting to the current conditions at the time, be it early season, late season at the end of March. They can adapt so well, and it means that irrelevant of the time of year you travel, or the time of the season you travel, you kind of know that you're always going to be covering some of the best water on the river at some point during your week. Caltapan, it's where I guided many years ago. It's the original lodge on the Rio Grande, and it's still one of the smartest and one of the most comfortable, and it's really a lodge that everything's run to very exacting standards, and if comfort is important to you, it's such a fantastic place. They also have an abundance of water, not only on the middle reaches of the main Rio Grande, but also on the tributary, the Rio Menendez. And this has really added an extra dimension to their fishing over recent years. When I was there, it was difficult to access this tributary, but now you can fish so much of it, and it's such interesting single-handed fishing for fish that are equally as large as on the main river. Villa Maria, which is one of the lower lodges on the main Rio Grande, that's such a fantastic option for early season fishing because they focus only on the lower water. And in early season, these fish, some of the lower beats can really stack full of fish, and you can have fantastic fishing in some of those really famous pools like Leandro's, which EMB call it, and La Villa. Villa Maria actually call it Fish Factory, and that's for a reason. It is stuffed full of fish early season, and it's a small lodge taking 6 rods, and just can be fantastic for those early bright fish. I mean, it's undeniably, it takes a while to get to Argentina, but if you are interested in swinging flies and sea trout fishing, it's got to be really high on your list if you haven't been before, because while it's two-handed fishing, it's not chucking and chancing. It's a really interesting fishery, and it's a fishery that rewards rods who have a thoughtful approach really well. And this is both on the Rio Grande and the Rio Gallegos. You really need to think about the angles you're casting, how you're mending, types of fly you're using, and the depths that you're fishing. And all of this is really important. And although you might be fishing deep at times, good presentation is absolutely key. And the guides are always really keen to reiterate this. A little bit on the guides. All of the lodges that I've mentioned have some of the strongest guide teams I've seen anywhere in the world. I've been very fortunate to have spent over a decade guiding all over the world myself. And I know a wee bit about guiding. I'm not sure I was a good guide, but I did it a while. And I can tell you that any of the lodges I've mentioned, they just have such a fantastic guide team. Most of them, almost all Argentine, many from the area, all obsessed about fishing, completely obsessed, really want you to catch fish, and are very keen to impart their knowledge on how they think you should be going through that pool. And although some of the pools on both the Rio Grande and the Rio Gallegos can be quite long, the taking spots where the fish you're likely to catch them can be very specific. So making sure you get those angles with the cast right and that you focus on the right area is essential. So as I always say, when you're on a trip, ask as many questions as you can, and that's the key. Ask questions. Don't be shy, because some guides are always more vocal than others. I hope that was a little bit of a useful information about the sea trout fishing in Argentina on these two amazing rivers. They really are two of the finest, well, they are the two finest sea trout rivers in the world. And regardless of sea trout, it's one hell of a trip. And I think one of the very finest fishing trips really you can do anywhere in the world. If anyone does have any questions, please just type it in the chat box. I'm, of course, very happy to answer anything. Well, no questions for now, but I hope you guys enjoyed that. And please stay tuned to our YouTube channel. Thank you. Goodbye.